You're lying in bed, exhausted, but your mind refuses to be quiet. And the more you try to relax, the more restless you feel. It's strange, isn't it? The reason you can't find peace right now might not be because you're doing too little, but because you've been holding on too tightly. So why does it feel like your mind won't let go, even when your body is begging for rest? This won't force you to sleep. But if you stay, you might notice something inside you begin to soften without trying. Because right now, in this quiet moment, your body is still, your room is silent, but your mind keeps replaying everything. Things you said, things you wish you said differently, moments that didn't go the way you hoped, and thoughts that seem to loop again and again and again. And it's like your mind is chasing something, even in the dark. Have you ever noticed how the harder you try to fix everything in your head, the more tangled it becomes? It almost feels like there's something unfinished, something you still need to figure out before you're allowed to rest. But what if the exhaustion you feel right now isn't coming from thinking too much? What if it's coming from holding on to things that were never meant to stay? Because deep down, there's a quiet tension, a subtle resistance, as if part of you is still trying to make something work, still trying to hold something together, even though it's already slipping away. And maybe that's why your mind won't stop, not because it's broken, but because it hasn't learned how to release. Here's the part most people never realize. Not everything you lose is a loss. Sometimes, what leaves your life was never meant to stay in the first place. And yet, we hold on. We replay. We resist. We chase. And even in stillness. But peace was never hiding somewhere far away. It was just waiting, on the other side of letting go. In this video, we'll gently explore why your mind keeps holding on and what begins to change when you finally stop chasing what was never meant for you. The invisible chase you didn't notice. But there's something most people never realize. The chase didn't start when you decided to want something. It started long before that. Maybe, without even noticing, you've been running in a direction that was never truly yours. Because when you think about it, how many of your desires were actually chosen by you? You wake up, you try to do well, to be liked, to be enough, to build something meaningful, to feel loved, respected, secure. And on the surface, it all seems natural. But if you slow down for just a moment, you might begin to notice something subtle, something almost invisible. That many of the things you're chasing, you never consciously chose to chase. They were handed to you quietly, over time, through expectations, through comparisons, and through moments when you felt like you weren't enough, and something inside you decided, I need to become more successful, more lovable, more accepted. And so, without realizing it, you started moving. Not because your heart was calling you, but because something inside you felt incomplete. Have you ever stopped and gently asked yourself, is this really what I want? Or just what I've been taught to want? It's not an easy question, because the answer can feel uncomfortable. There's a quiet moment, maybe late at night like this, when everything slows down and you begin to sense it. That strange feeling, like you've been trying so hard, but not quite knowing why. Like you're moving, but not arriving. And maybe you felt it before, in the middle of achieving something you once thought you needed, only to realize it didn't feel the way you expected. There was no lasting peace, no deep sense of this is it, just a brief moment of relief, and followed by another quiet urge to chase something else, It almost feels like no matter how much you reach, something keeps slipping just out of your grasp, not because you're failing, but because what you're reaching for was never truly aligned with you. In Buddhist understanding, this is not seen as a mistake. It's seen as a kind of unconscious momentum, a pattern formed by past experiences, by conditioning, by the subtle desire to avoid discomfort and move towards something that promises completion. But here's the deeper truth. If the desire wasn't truly yours, then no amount of chasing will ever make it feel complete. And yet, we keep going. We keep trying to prove something to ourselves, to others, to an invisible standard we rarely question. There's a quiet kind of exhaustion in that. Not loud, not dramatic, just a constant, underlying tension, like holding something for too long without realizing you could have put it down. Maybe you felt it in your body, that subtle tightness in your chest, your shoulders, your thoughts, the kind of tiredness that sleep doesn't fix. Because it's not just physical, it's the weight of carrying desires that don't belong to you. And the most difficult part is, it all feels so normal. Everyone around you is chasing too. So it never really occurs to you to question the direction. But sometimes, in a quiet moment like this, a small awareness begins to rise, a gentle pause, and within that pause, a different kind of question appears. Not, how do I get there faster? But, do I even need to go there at all? And that question changes something, because the moment you begin to see the chase is the moment you begin to step out of it. Not all at once, not dramatically, but softly, like loosening your grip on something you didn't realize you were holding. And maybe this is where everything begins to shift, not in doing more, but in finally seeing and what you've been doing without awareness. Because awareness doesn't force you to stop. It simply shows you the truth. And once you see it, something inside you naturally begins to slow down, not because you gave up, but because, for the first time, you're no longer chasing blindly. 2. Why letting go feels like losing yourself. But here's where it becomes even more difficult. The moment you begin to see the chase, something inside you resists letting it go. Because it doesn't just feel like you're releasing a goal, it feels like you're losing a part of yourself. After everything we just explored, after realizing how much of your life has been shaped by unconscious chasing, a deeper question begins to rise. If you stop chasing, then who are you? And that question can feel unsettling. Because for so long, your identity has quietly been built around what you pursue, what you achieve, what others think of you, how needed you feel, how much you can hold together. It's not just something you do. It becomes who you believe you are. So, when life begins to pull something away, a relationship, a dream, as an expectation you've carried for years, it doesn't feel like something external is ending. It feels like you're being undone. Maybe you felt that before. That moment when something didn't work out, and instead of just feeling disappointed, you felt lost. Like the ground beneath you shifted, like a quiet voice inside asked, if this is gone, then what's left of me? And in that moment, letting go doesn't feel peaceful. It feels like falling, like stepping into something unknown, without knowing who you are on the other side. And so, naturally, you hold on tighter, not because it's right for you, but because it feels safer than the emptiness. If this feels familiar, you're not the only one who has felt this way. Sometimes, you can quietly share your experience in the comments, not to explain, just to know you're not alone. Because this isn't weakness, it's something much deeper. And it's the mind trying to protect an identity that it has spent years building. But here's something worth gently noticing. Is that identity really you? Or is it something you learn to become over time? Think about it. The roles you play, the expectations you carry, the version of yourself you try to maintain. Where did they come from? Were they always yours? Or were they shaped by moments when you needed to belong, to be accepted, to feel enough? There's a quiet story many people carry, a story that says, if I achieve this, then I'll be worthy. If I keep this, then I'll be secure. If I don't lose this, then I'll be okay. And over time, that story becomes your identity. So when something begins to slip away, it doesn't just feel like loss. It feels like the collapse of the story you've been living inside. But maybe it almost feels like you've been holding something so tightly for so long that you forgot what it feels like to have open hands. Imagine holding a handful of sand. At first, and it rests gently in your palm. But the moment you try to hold it tighter, to make sure none of it escapes, it begins to slip through your fingers. The tighter you grip, the faster it disappears. And eventually, you're left with less than you started with. Not because you did something wrong, but because the act of holding too tightly was never meant to preserve it. In many ways, this is how we hold on to parts of our lives. We tighten our grip on people, on outcomes, on identities, hoping that effort will keep everything in place. But the truth is, some things were never meant to be held that way, and some versions of you were never meant to last forever. Not because they're wrong, but because they've already served their purpose. Still, letting go feels like losing yourself, because you haven't yet seen what remains when the grip softens. Have you ever wondered who you are without the pressure to prove anything? Without needing to be seen a certain way? Without chasing something just to feel enough? It's a quiet question, and for many, it's one they've never allowed themselves to sit with, because the mind quickly jumps in, trying to rebuild something, to replace what's being lost. Another goal, another role, another identity. Anything to avoid that empty space. But what if that space is not something to fear? What if it's not emptiness, but openness? Not loss, but release. In Buddhist understanding, this is where something very subtle begins to shift. The idea that you are not the things you hold on to, not your achievements, not your roles, not even your struggles. Those are experiences, but you are the awareness behind them. And awareness doesn't disappear when something ends. It remains quiet, still, unshaken. But to see that, you have to be willing, just for a moment, to loosen your grip. Not forcefully, not all at once, just a little, and notice what happens. Because maybe letting go is not the end of who you are. Maybe it's the beginning of discovering what was never dependent on anything to begin with. And that realization doesn't come from holding on tighter. It comes from gently allowing something to fall away. So the question becomes not, what will I lose if I let go? But what might finally reveal itself when I stop trying to hold everything together? 2. Why letting go feels like losing yourself. But here's where it becomes even more difficult. The moment you begin to see the chase, something inside you resists letting it go. Because it doesn't just feel like you're releasing a goal. It feels like you're losing a part of yourself. After everything we just explored, after realizing how much of your life has been shaped by unconscious chasing, a deeper question begins to rise. If you stop chasing, then who are you? And that question can feel unsettling, because for so long, your identity has quietly been built around what you pursue, what you achieve, what others think of you, how needed you feel, how much you can hold together. It's not just something you do, it becomes who you believe you are. So, when life begins to pull something away, a relationship, a dream, and an expectation you've carried for years, it doesn't feel like something external is ending. It feels like you are being undone. Maybe you felt that before. That moment when something didn't work out, and instead of just feeling disappointed, you felt lost. Like the ground beneath you shifted. Like a quiet voice inside asked, "If this is gone, then what's left of me?" And in that moment, letting go doesn't feel peaceful. It feels like falling, like stepping into something unknown, without knowing who you are on the other side. And so, naturally, you hold on tighter, not because it's right for you, but because it feels safer than the emptiness. If this feels familiar, you're not the only one who has felt this way. Sometimes, you can quietly share your experience in the comments. Not to explain, just to know you're not alone. Because this isn't weakness, it's something much deeper. And it's the mind trying to protect an identity that it has spent years building. But here's something worth gently noticing. Is that identity really you? Or is it something you learn to become over time? Think about it. The roles you play, the expectations you carry, the version of yourself you try to maintain. Where did they come from? Were they always yours? Or were they shaped by moments when you needed to belong, to be accepted, to feel enough? There's a quiet story many people carry. A story that says, if I achieve this, then I'll be worthy. If I keep this, then I'll be secure. If I don't lose this, then I'll be okay. And over time, that story becomes your identity. So, when something begins to slip away, it doesn't just feel like loss. It feels like the collapse of the story you've been living inside. But maybe, it almost feels like you've been holding something so tightly for so long that you forgot what it feels like to have open hands. Imagine holding a handful of sand. At first, it rests gently in your palm. But the moment you try to hold it tighter, to make sure none of it escapes, it begins to slip through your fingers. The tighter you grip, the faster it disappears. And eventually, you're left with less than you started with. Not because you did something wrong, but because the act of holding too tightly was never meant to preserve it. In many ways, this is how we hold on to parts of our lives. We tighten our grip on people, on outcomes, on identities, hoping that effort will keep everything in place. But the truth is, some things were never meant to be held that way, and some versions of you were never meant to last forever. Not because they're wrong, but because they've already served their purpose. Still, letting go feels like losing yourself, because you haven't yet seen what remains when the grip softens. Have you ever wondered who you are without the pressure to prove anything, without needing to be seen a certain way, without chasing something just to feel enough? It's a quiet question, and for many, it's one they've never allowed themselves to sit with, because the mind quickly jumps in, trying to rebuild something, to replace what's being lost. Another goal, another role, another identity, anything, to avoid that empty space. But what if that space is not something to fear? What if it's not emptiness, but openness? Not loss, but release. In Buddhist understanding, this is where something very subtle begins to shift. The idea that you are not the things you hold on to, not your achievements, not your roles, not even your struggles. Those are experiences, but you are the awareness behind them. And awareness doesn't disappear when something ends. It remains quiet, still, unshaken. But to see that, you have to be willing, just for a moment, to loosen your grip. Not forcefully, not all at once, just a little, and notice what happens. Because maybe letting go is not the end of who you are. Maybe it's the beginning of discovering what was never dependent on anything to begin with. And that realization doesn't come from holding on tighter. It comes from gently allowing something to fall away. So the question becomes, not what will I lose if I let go, but what might finally reveal itself when I stop trying to hold everything together. 3. The pain of wanting what doesn't want you. And this is where the pain becomes undeniable. When you finally see it, but still can't stop feeling it. Because even after everything we've explored, even after noticing the chase, there are still moments when your heart holds on, not gently, but tightly, as if letting go would mean losing something important, something you still believe could work. If only you tried a little harder. Maybe it was a relationship, someone you kept showing up for, even when they stopped meeting you halfway. You told yourself to be patient, to be understanding, to give it time. But deep down, there was a quiet knowing, a subtle feeling that something wasn't aligned. And yet, you stayed. You tried to become easier to love, less demanding, more understanding. You adjusted yourself, again and again, hoping that one day they would finally choose you. Or maybe it wasn't a person. Maybe it was a version of your life, a path you believed would bring fulfillment, a goal you invested years into. And even when it stopped feeling right, even when it drained you more than it gave, you kept going, because walking away felt like failure. Have you ever paused and quietly asked yourself, why did I try so hard to be chosen? It's not an easy question, because the answer often carries a kind of sadness, a quiet heartbreak that doesn't always show on the surface, the pain of wanting something that doesn't want you back. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in small ways, in delayed responses, in one-sided effort, in doors that never fully open, no matter how long you stand there waiting. And what makes it even harder is that part of you still believes, if I just try a little more, maybe it will change. If this feels familiar, you're not alone. You can gently share your experience in the comments. Sometimes just putting it into words makes it feel a little lighter, because this kind of pain is deeply human. It doesn't mean you're weak. It means you cared. But in Buddhist understanding, there is a quiet truth hidden inside this pain. Attachment is what turns desire into suffering, not the wanting itself, but the clinging, the holding on, even when reality is showing you something different. Because when you attach your sense of worth to being chosen, to being validated, to being accepted, then every moment of not receiving that feels like rejection, not just of the situation, but of you. And so, you try harder, you give more, you wait longer, you hope deeper. But the more you invest, the more it hurts when it doesn't return. It's like standing in front of a closed door, knocking gently at first, then louder, then desperately, hoping someone inside will finally open it. But what if there was never anyone on the other side? What if the door was never meant to open for you? It's a difficult realization, because it asks you to face something painful. That sometimes, no matter how much you want something, it simply isn't meant for you. Not because you're not enough, but because it was never aligned with your path. There's a quiet kind of freedom in that truth, but it doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like loss. It feels like all the time, all the energy, all the emotion you poured into something was for nothing. But maybe it almost feels like you've been pouring water into a cup with no bottom. No matter how much you give, it never fills. Not because you're not giving enough, but because it was never designed to hold what you're offering. And yet, we keep pouring, because stopping means facing the emptiness, means accepting that it won't become what we hoped. And that is where the real pain lives, and not in the loss itself, but in the letting go of the possibility. Have you ever noticed how hard it is to release something, not because of what it is, but because of what it could have been? That imagined future, that version of the story where everything works out, sometimes that's what we're really holding on to, not reality, but hope. And hope, when tied to attachment, can quietly become a source of suffering, because it keeps you connected to something that isn't truly there. Still, this isn't something you can force yourself to stop. You can't simply decide, I won't care anymore. That's not how the heart works, but you can begin to see more clearly. You can begin to notice when effort turns into force, when love turns into longing, when patience turns into waiting without end. And in that awareness, something begins to shift. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but gently, like stepping back, just enough to see the situation for what it truly is. And in that moment, you may begin to understand something very simple and very freeing. You were never meant to beg for what is truly yours, because what is meant for you doesn't require you to lose yourself to keep it. And maybe that's the part that hurts the most, realizing how much of yourself you gave away just to feel chosen. But also realizing that you don't have to do that anymore. And maybe that's where something new begins. And in a quiet moment like this, when the night feels still and your thoughts begin to slow, you might feel that familiar ache, that memory of something you once held on to so tightly. And perhaps tonight, instead of asking why it didn't stay, you gently begin to wonder, what part of you is finally ready to let it go? There's a kind of pain that you don't talk about, not because it's small, but because it's too quiet for anyone to notice. It's the pain of realizing you were never being chosen, only tolerated, only accepted when convenient. And maybe the hardest part is, you saw the signs, you felt the distance, you noticed the imbalance, but you stayed. Not because you didn't know, but because a part of you hoped that if you loved harder, you would finally be enough. 4. You were never rejected, only redirected. But there's a perspective that quietly changes everything once you're ready to see it. Because after feeling the pain, after recognizing how deeply it hurts to want something that doesn't want you, another question begins to rise. What if it was never rejection? What if it was something else entirely? Because when you look back at the moments that hurt the most, the unanswered messages, the missed opportunities, the doors that stayed closed, no matter how long you waited, it's easy to tell yourself a story. I wasn't enough. I should have tried harder. Something must be wrong with me. And slowly, without even realizing it, you begin to carry that belief, not just as a thought, but as a quiet weight inside you. But what if that weight was never yours to carry? What if life wasn't rejecting you, but gently, and sometimes painfully, redirecting you? It's not an easy idea to accept, because in the moment, it doesn't feel like guidance. It feels like loss. It feels like something being taken away before you were ready to let it go. Maybe you remember a time when something ended unexpectedly, a connection that faded, a plan that didn't unfold, a version of your life that simply didn't happen. And at the time, it felt like everything was falling apart. You questioned yourself. You replayed every detail. You wondered what you could have done differently. But now, with a little distance, can you see it more clearly? Can you see how that ending changed your direction? How it moved you away from something that was never quite right? It's subtle, because when you're inside the experience, you only see what you're losing. But with time, you begin to notice what you were being protected from. In Buddhist understanding, life doesn't always give you what you want, but it often removes what doesn't align, not as punishment, but as a form of quiet compassion. Because sometimes we hold on to things that cannot grow with us. We stay in places that slowly drain us. We chase people who cannot meet us where we are. And if nothing ever interrupted that, we might stay there much longer than we should. So life intervenes, not always gently, not always in a way we understand, but in a way that creates space. And space is where something new becomes possible. It almost feels like you were standing in a room filled with things that no longer belong to you. Old expectations, outgrown versions of yourself, connections that had already quietly ended. But because everything was still there, you couldn't see clearly. You couldn't move freely. So slowly, one by one, those things began to fall away. Not all at once, but enough to create discomfort. Enough to make you question everything. And in that discomfort, you called it rejection. But maybe it was clearing, making room for something that actually fits who you're becoming. Have you ever noticed how something that once felt like a loss later revealed itself as a turning point? A moment that didn't make sense at the time, but eventually led you somewhere better? Not perfect, but more aligned, more honest, more peaceful. That's the paradox most people miss. What leaves your life is not always taking something from you. Sometimes, it's making space for what truly belongs. And this doesn't mean you won't feel the pain. You will. Because even when something isn't right for you, you can still care about it. You can still miss it. You can still wish it had turned out differently. But pain doesn't always mean something was meant to stay. Sometimes, it simply means you were attached. And attachment makes every ending feel like a personal loss. But here's something worth holding on to. Not everything that ends is a failure. Some things end because they are finished, not broken, not wasted, just complete. Like a chapter that was never meant to become the whole story. And once you begin to see it this way, something inside you softens. You stop asking, why did this happen to me? And slowly, you begin to ask, where is this leading me? That shift, is quiet, but powerful, because it moves you from resistance to openness, from holding on to allowing. And in that allowing, there is a different kind of peace, not the kind that comes from everything going your way, but the kind that comes from trusting that what is leaving is making space for something that doesn't require you to chase, space for something that meets you without force. And maybe you don't need to fully believe this yet. Maybe it's enough to simply consider the possibility that not every closed door, was a rejection, and not every ending was a mistake. Maybe some things had to fall away so you could finally walk a path that was always meant for you. And perhaps the next time something doesn't work out, instead of tightening your grip, you pause just for a moment and wonder, is this being taken from me, or is it gently being moved out of my way? 5. The illusion of control. But there is one layer beneath all of this that quietly keeps the cycle going, even when you begin to see it. The belief that if you just try hard enough, you can control how everything turns out. After everything we've just explored, the chasing, the attachment, the pain of holding on, it might feel like the solution is simple. Try differently. Do better. Be more careful next time. But what if the problem was never about how you tried? What if it was the belief that trying guarantees anything at all? Because if you look closely, much of your effort is not just about action. It's about control. Trying to control how people feel about you. Trying to control how situations unfold. Trying to control timing, outcomes, reactions, even trying to control your own thoughts. And on the surface, this feels responsible. It feels like you're doing what you're supposed to do, because effort is often praised. But underneath that effort, there's something much quieter. A subtle fear, a belief that says, if I don't stay in control, something will go wrong. Have you ever noticed how exhausting that becomes? Always thinking ahead, always preparing, always adjusting, just in case. Even in moments of stillness, your mind doesn't fully rest, because part of you is still watching, still calculating, still trying to keep everything from falling apart. It's like holding a glass of water. At first, it doesn't feel heavy, but the longer you hold it, without putting it down, the heavier it becomes. Not because the weight changed, but because you never allowed yourself to release it. And control works in the same way. The longer you hold on to it, the more it drains you. But here's where it becomes even more subtle. Control feels comforting. It gives you the illusion that you are safe, that if you just think enough, plan enough, try enough, you can prevent pain, you can avoid loss, you can make things work. But life doesn't follow that kind of agreement. You can do everything right and still be misunderstood. You can give your best and still not receive what you hoped for. You can plan carefully and still watch things unfold in ways you didn't expect. Not because you failed, but because life has never been fully within your control. And that truth can feel uncomfortable at first, because it removes something familiar, the idea that effort equals outcome. But maybe that idea was never as solid as it seemed. It almost feels like you've been trying to control the ocean, adjusting your movements, watching the waves, trying to predict what comes next, hoping that if you understand it well enough, you can keep everything calm. But the ocean was never meant to be controlled, only experienced, only moved with. And in the same way, life is not something you can force into place. It's something you learn to flow with. This doesn't mean you stop trying. It doesn't mean you become passive. It simply means you begin to see the difference between effort and attachment to outcome, between action and control. Because effort can be peaceful when it's not tied to a specific result. But control always carries tension, always carries fear, because it depends on something that was never fully yours to hold. So maybe the question isn't, how can I control this better? But something much quieter and much more honest. What are you afraid would happen if you stopped trying to control everything? Would things fall apart? Or would something finally begin to unfold naturally? There's a small story many people live inside. A story where they believe if they relax their grip, everything will collapse. But what if it almost feels like you've been holding the steering wheel so tightly that you forgot the road can guide you too? That not everything requires force, that not everything needs to be managed for it to move forward. There's a quiet moment when you begin to loosen that grip, just slightly, not giving up, but softening. And in that moment, something unexpected happens. You notice how much tension you were carrying, how much effort was going into things that were never fully in your control. And with that awareness, a different kind of choice appears, not to control less out of fear, but to trust more out of understanding. Because control was never the thing keeping you safe. It was just the thing keeping you tired. And maybe, if this perspective resonates with you, you can let it reach someone else who might need it too. Because many people are still holding on, without realizing they can soften. And maybe tonight, you don't have to figure everything out. You don't have to solve every uncertainty. You don't have to control what hasn't happened yet. Maybe, for this moment, it's enough to simply notice the weight you've been carrying and gently ask yourself, what would it feel like to put it down, even just for a while? And maybe this is the moment that feels the most uncomfortable, because if control was never real, then all that effort, all that overthinking, all those nights you couldn't rest, what were they for? It almost feels like you've been trying to solve a problem that was never yours to fix. And that realization, it doesn't just free you, it humbles you. 6. Micropractice, the gentle art of releasing. And maybe this is the moment where understanding quietly turns into experience, because up until now, you've been noticing the patterns, the attachment, the need to control. But there's something even more powerful than seeing it, feeling what it's like to loosen your hold. So, for a moment, you don't need to analyze anything. You don't need to fix anything. Just gently bring your attention inward. Notice your body resting where you are, the weight of your shoulders, the stillness of your hands, the quiet rhythm of your breath. You don't need to change your breathing. Just notice it, slowly, softly, coming in and going out. And as you stay here, you might begin to notice something subtle, a place in your body where there is tension. Maybe it's in your chest, maybe your jaw, maybe your stomach, or your thoughts. There's often something you've been holding, not physically, but internally. A situation, a person, an outcome you're still waiting for. You don't have to name it perfectly. Just let one thing gently come into your awareness, something you've been trying to hold together. And now, instead of pushing it away or holding it tighter, just notice how you're holding it. Is there pressure? Is there a quiet resistance? A feeling that says, this shouldn't be this way? Take a slow breath in, and as you breathe out, see if you can soften, just a little, not letting it go completely, just loosening your grip. Because you don't have to drop everything. You don't have to force yourself to move on. Just stop holding so tightly. It's like unclenching your hand. You don't throw anything away. You simply open your fingers. And for a moment, notice the difference. That small shift from tightness to softness, from control to allowing. If your mind starts to wander, that's okay. Gently bring it back to your breath, in and out. And again, bring your attention to that one thing, the thing you've been carrying. Notice how it feels now. Maybe it's still there, but is the tension the same? Or has something softened, even slightly? This is how letting go begins, not as a sudden release, but as a quiet easing, a gentle willingness to not grip so hard. There's a simple image you can hold on to. Imagine you've been carrying a heavy bag for a long time, so long, you forgot what it feels like to set it down. And now, you don't have to throw it away. You don't have to decide anything about it. Just imagine placing it gently on the ground, right beside you, still there, still within reach, but no longer weighing on you. Take another breath and notice how your body responds. There may be a sense of space, a slight lightness, maybe even a small sense of relief that you weren't expecting. This is the beginning, not of losing something, but of freeing yourself from the tension of holding it. And maybe this is something you can return to whenever your mind starts to tighten again, not to escape, but to remind yourself you always have the choice to soften. If this moment brought even a small sense of ease, you might want to let it reach someone else who needs it too. Because sometimes the simplest practices are the ones we forget the most. And if you're on a journey like this, learning to release little by little, you're always welcome to stay here in this quiet space. And maybe in a moment like this, when everything slows down just a little, you begin to realize how much you've been holding without noticing. And perhaps tonight, you don't need to let it all go, just enough to finally feel the space within you again. 7. When effort becomes attachment. But there's a subtle shift that most people never notice until they begin to feel exhausted by their own effort. Because effort, in itself, is not the problem. In fact, effort can be beautiful. It's what allows you to grow, to care, to show up for your life. But somewhere along the way, effort quietly turns into something else, something heavier, something tighter. And without realizing it, you stop moving with life and start pushing against it. After everything we've explored, the chasing, the holding on, the need to control, you might begin to notice something within yourself, that even when you're trying your best, there's still tension, a quiet pressure beneath your actions, like something inside you is saying, this has to work. And that's where it becomes attachment. It's no longer just about doing something. It becomes about needing a specific outcome, needing things to go a certain way, needing your effort to be rewarded. And the moment that need appears, peace begins to slip away. It's very subtle, because on the outside, you're still doing the same things, working, trying, caring. But on the inside, something feels different. There's impatience, there's anxiety, there's a constant checking. Is this working yet? Have you ever noticed how exhausting that feels? That quiet urgency that never fully lets you rest? It's like you're always leaning forward, mentally, emotionally, waiting for the result to arrive. And until it does, you can't relax. This is where the paradox begins. The harder you chase peace, the further it seems to move away. The more you try to feel secure, the more uncertain everything feels. The more you push for things to happen, the more resistance you experience. It almost feels like you're running towards something that keeps stepping back. And nowhere is this more clear than in the simple act of trying to sleep. You've probably felt it before. You lie down, your body is tired, your eyes are heavy, and you tell yourself, I need to fall asleep. At first, it seems reasonable, but then your mind starts paying attention. Why am I not asleep yet? What if I don't get enough rest? I need to sleep now. And suddenly, sleep becomes something you're chasing, something you're trying to control. And the more you try, the more awake you become. not because you're broken, but because sleep was never something you could force. It comes when you stop trying. And in many ways, peace works the same way. You cannot force yourself into calmness. You cannot demand stillness from your mind. The moment you turn it into something to achieve, it slips further away. Because peace is not a result of effort. It's what remains when effort softens. But this is not something we're taught. We're taught that effort leads to results. That persistence guarantees outcomes. And while that may be true in certain areas of life, it doesn't apply to everything, especially not to your inner state. Because the more you attach effort to inner peace, the more you create resistance within yourself. It's like trying to smooth water by pressing down on it. The more you push, the more it ripples. But if you step back, if you stop interfering, the surface naturally becomes still. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you stop showing up. It simply means you begin to act without clinging to the result. You do what you can, but you don't tie your peace to what happens next. And that shift changes everything. Because now, effort becomes lighter, more natural, less forced. You're no longer chasing, you're simply participating. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to give your best without needing anything in return? To care without holding on? To move forward without constantly checking if you're getting closer? It's a different way of being. And at first, it may feel unfamiliar because you're so used to measuring progress, to tracking results, to making sure things are working. But slowly, as you begin to loosen that need, something inside you relaxes. Not because everything is perfect, but because you're no longer depending on perfection to feel at ease. And maybe that's the quiet truth hidden here. That peace was never something your effort could produce. It was something your attachment was covering. So the invitation is not to stop trying, but to notice when trying becomes clinging, when effort becomes pressure, when action becomes identity. And in those moments, gently step back, not in defeat, but in awareness. Because the moment you release the need for things to happen is often the moment they begin to unfold more naturally. And even if they don't, you're no longer trapped in the tension of needing them to. And that alone is a kind of freedom. A quiet one, but a real one. And maybe this is where something deeper begins to emerge, not from pushing harder, but from finally allowing yourself to soften while still moving forward. 8. You are not meant for everything. And that's peaceful. And somewhere along this journey, a quieter realization begins to emerge. Not everything is meant for you, and for a long time, that truth might have felt uncomfortable, maybe even limiting, because part of you was taught that you should be able to become anything, have anything, be everything, if you just try hard enough. But after everything you've seen so far, the chasing, the attachment, the illusion of control, you may begin to notice something different. That trying to be everything is exactly what has been exhausting you. Because when you try to be for everyone, you slowly lose the sense of who you truly are. Maybe you felt that before, saying yes when you wanted to say no, staying in places that didn't feel right, just to avoid disappointing someone, trying to fit into expectations that never quite matched who you are inside. And over time, it becomes tiring, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, constant way, like wearing something that doesn't quite fit every single day. You adjust, you tolerate, you convince yourself it's fine, but deep down, something always feels slightly off, and that feeling is trying to tell you something. Not everything is meant for you. not every path, not every person, not every version of success. And strangely, this is not something to fear. It's something that brings clarity. Because clarity is not about knowing what to chase. It's about knowing what to stop chasing. And when you begin to see that, something inside you softens. You no longer feel the need to force yourself into every opportunity. You no longer feel responsible for being understood by everyone. You begin to allow some things to pass by without chasing, without questioning your worth. Oh, it almost feels like you've been trying to open every door you see, walking down a long hallway, knocking on each one, hoping something behind it will finally feel right. But maybe not every door is meant to open for you. And more importantly, you don't need every door to open to find the one that does. There's a quiet story that unfolds here. Imagine someone who spent years trying to fit into a life that looked right on the outside, a career that made sense, a relationship that seemed acceptable, a path that others approved of. But inside, there was always a feeling of misalignment, not loud, just subtle, like something was missing, but hard to explain. And one day, they stopped trying to force it, not because they had everything figured out, but because they were too tired to keep pretending it felt right. And in that moment, something unexpected happened. Nothing dramatic, no sudden breakthrough, just a small sense of relief, like taking off something heavy that they didn't realize they were carrying. And from that space, they began to notice something new, what actually felt natural, what didn't require force, what didn't make them question themselves constantly. That's the difference between effort and alignment. Effort pushes, alignment flows. Effort asks, how can I make this work? Alignment quietly responds, this already feels right. Have you ever experienced something that didn't require you to become someone else? A place where you didn't have to prove yourself. A connection where you didn't have to overthink every word. A moment where things simply felt easy, not perfect, but natural. That's what alignment feels like. And the more you begin to recognize it, the less interested you become in forcing anything else. Because forcing always comes with tension, always carries a sense of trying to make it work. But alignment feels like you don't have to try so hard to be accepted, to belong, to exist. And this is where a deeper kind of peace begins, not from having everything, but from no longer needing everything. Because when you stop trying to be for everyone, you finally create space to be fully yourself. And that space is where something real can grow. Not something you chase, but something that meets you as you are. So maybe you were never meant to have everything. Maybe you were never meant to be everything. And maybe that was never a limitation. Maybe it was a quiet form of guidance, gently leading you away from what doesn't fit, so you can recognize what truly does. And perhaps the next time something doesn't work out, instead of asking, why wasn't this for me? You pause, just for a moment, and ask something softer. What is this making space for? And in that question, you may begin to feel a different kind of peace forming. 9. The moment you realize it was never yours. And then there comes a moment, not loud, not dramatic, but quietly, unmistakably clear. A moment where something inside you finally whispers, this was never mine. After everything you've been through, the chasing, the holding on, the trying, the hoping it would somehow work out, you begin to see it, not as a thought, but as a feeling, a deep, steady knowing that what you were fighting for was never truly meant to stay in your life. And strangely, this realization doesn't come with anger. It comes with a kind of silence, a pause, like your mind stops resisting just long enough for the truth to settle in. Maybe you've already felt this before, that moment when you look back at something, a person, a situation, a version of your life, and instead of asking, "Why did I lose this?" you quietly realize, "I was trying to hold on to something that never really belonged to me." And in that moment, something shifts. Not everything at once, but enough to feel different. Because up until then, you were still hoping, still trying to make sense of it, still searching for a way to fix it. But now, there's nothing left to fix, only something to understand. It almost feels like you've been trying to fit yourself into a space that was never your shape, adjusting who you are, shrinking parts of yourself, stretching beyond what feels natural, just to make it work. And maybe for a while, it almost did. But deep down, there was always tension, because no matter how much you adapted, something never quite aligned. And now, you see why. It wasn't because you didn't try hard enough. It wasn't because you weren't enough. It was because it was never meant to fit you in the first place. There's a quiet kind of grief in that realization. Not the loud kind, but the soft, lingering kind. Grief for the time you spent, for the energy you gave, for the version of the story you believed in. And that grief is part of letting go, not something to avoid, but something to gently allow. Because when you finally see the truth, you don't need to force yourself to release it. The release happens naturally, like your hands, tired of holding something that no longer feels right, finally begin to open. Have you ever noticed how different it feels to let go when you understand, instead of when you're forced to? When you're forced, there's resistance. But when you see clearly, there's acceptance. A quiet exhale that says, "I don't need to hold this anymore." And in that moment, you stop blaming yourself. You stop replaying every detail. You stop asking, "What could I have done differently?" Because the answer no longer matters. What matters is, like, you see it now. You see the misalignment. You see the effort that was never meant to sustain it. You see the part of yourself that was trying to fit into something, just to feel enough. And with that awareness, something inside you softens, not because everything feels good, but because everything feels true. And truth has a quiet way of bringing peace, even when it's not the outcome you hoped for. There's a simple image you can return to. Imagine trying to place a piece into a puzzle that doesn't belong there. At first, you push gently, then harder. You turn it, adjust it, press it down, hoping it will somehow fit. But no matter how much effort you use, it never sits naturally. And eventually, you realize it was never the right piece. Not broken, not wrong, just not meant for that space. And in that realization, you don't need to force it anymore. You simply set it down. And maybe that's where you are right now, at the edge of that realization, not fully released yet, but no longer holding on the same way. And if you've been walking this path, learning to see things more clearly, learning to let go, little by little, you're always welcome to stay here, in this quiet space. And maybe, in a moment like this, when the night feels still, and your thoughts are a little softer, you begin to feel that quiet truth settling in, that what you were holding on to was never truly yours to carry. And perhaps tonight, you don't need to force yourself to move on. Just gently allow what no longer belongs to fall away on its own. 10. Micro practice, returning to yourself. And after everything you've just seen, there's a quiet invitation here, not to understand more, but to return. Because for so long, your attention has been moving outward, chasing, fixing, trying to make sense of things. And even now, a part of your mind may still be searching, looking for answers, looking for resolution. But what if, for this moment, you didn't need to figure anything out? What if nothing needed to be solved right now? So gently, bring your attention back, not to your thoughts, but to yourself. Notice your body again, the way you're sitting or lying down, the subtle weight of your presence, your hands resting without effort, your shoulders carrying less than before, and your breath. Just notice it. There's no need to change it, no need to make it deeper or slower. Just feel it as it is, in and out. And as you stay here, you may notice something interesting. The mind might still be active. Thoughts may still appear. Memories, questions, small fragments of things you were thinking about earlier. That's okay. You don't need to stop them. You don't need to control them. Just let them pass, like clouds moving through the sky, because you are not the thoughts. You are the one aware of them. And awareness doesn't need to chase anything. It simply notices. It almost feels like you've been standing in the middle of a busy road, trying to direct every passing car, every thought, every emotion, every possibility. But now, you step onto the sidewalk. You're still aware of everything, but you're no longer in the middle of it. You're not being pulled in every direction. You're simply here. And in this space, there is nothing to fix, nothing to chase, nothing to become. And just this moment, just this breath, just this quiet sense of being. If your mind pulls you away again, gently return. Not with force, not with frustration, just a soft awareness. I'm here again. And maybe you begin to notice how rare this feeling is. To not be reaching for something, to not be trying to hold on to anything, to not be measuring yourself against anything at all, just existing. And strangely, there's a kind of peace in that, not because everything in your life is perfect, but because for this moment, you are not resisting anything. There's a simple image you can hold. Imagine sitting beside a quiet lake. The water is still, not because you forced it to be still, but because nothing is disturbing it. And your mind, in this moment, is like that water, not completely empty, but undisturbed, naturally settling. Have you ever noticed that when you stop interfering, things often begin to calm on their own? And that stillness is not something you create, but something you allow? And maybe this is what returning to yourself feels like. Not becoming someone new, not achieving a higher state, but simply coming back to what has always been here, beneath the noise, beneath the effort, beneath the need to chase. A quiet presence, steady, unmoving, unaffected by what comes and goes. And from this place, you begin to relate to life differently, not from urgency, not from lack, but from a sense of enoughness. Because when you are here, fully present, you don't need anything else to complete you. And maybe this is what you've been searching for all along. Not something outside of you, but a way to return to what you already are. So for a few more breaths, just stay here. No effort, no expectation, just this moment, as it is. And maybe, in a quiet moment like this, when your mind is no longer reaching so far, you begin to feel something gentle, something steady, as something that was always here beneath the noise. And perhaps tonight, you don't need to become anything more. Just softly remember what it feels like to come back to yourself. And if you stay here just a little longer, you may begin to notice something unusual: the absence of urgency. No need to become, no need to reach, no need to figure anything out. And in that absence, there is a quiet kind of relief, the kind you don't get from achieving something, but from no longer needing to. 11. The peace that comes when you stop running. And then, something unexpected begins to happen. Not because you tried harder, but because you finally stopped running. After everything you've been holding, chasing, controlling, trying to fix, there comes a quiet moment when your mind simply slows down. Not forced, not controlled, just less restless than before. And in that space, something unfamiliar appears: stillness. At first, it might feel strange, almost like something is missing, because you're so used to movement, so used to thinking, planning, worrying, reaching for the next thing. So when that movement fades, even slightly, it can feel like emptiness, like there's nothing there. But if you stay with it just a little longer, you begin to notice something different. It's not empty, it's quiet. And within that quiet, there is a kind of fullness. Not the kind that comes from achieving something, not the kind that depends on anything external, but a simple yet steady presence. It almost feels like you've been running for so long that you forgot what it feels like to stand still. And now, as you stop, your body doesn't immediately relax. Your mind doesn't instantly settle. There's a transition, a soft adjustment. But slowly, something begins to open, like a space inside you that was always there, but covered by constant movement. Have you ever noticed how when you stop chasing something, your awareness expands? You start to see things more clearly. You notice your surroundings, your breath, your thoughts, without being pulled by them. It's as if, by no longer reaching outward, you begin to return inward. And in that return, there is peace. Not because everything in your life is resolved, but because, for this moment, you are no longer fighting with reality. There's a quiet story many people live inside. A story that says, "I'll be at peace when this works out. I'll relax when everything is in place. I'll feel okay once I get there." But what if peace was never waiting at the end of that journey? What if it was only hidden by the act of constantly running towards something? Because when you stop, even briefly, you begin to see there was never anything missing in this moment, only the belief that something was. It almost feels like you've been standing in a room, searching for something you thought you lost, looking under everything, checking every corner, becoming more and more restless the longer you search. But then you stop, and in that stillness, you realize what you were looking for was never gone. You were just too busy searching to notice it was already here. That's what this peace feels like, and not something new, but something uncovered. Have you ever asked yourself who you are when you're not trying to prove anything? Not trying to succeed, not trying to be seen a certain way, not trying to hold everything together, just you, without the pressure, without the performance, without the constant movement. It's a difficult question because most people have never experienced that state. Or if they have, it was only for a moment, a brief pause between thoughts, a quiet breath between worries. But now, you're beginning to recognize it, that part of you that exists without needing anything. And that part is always at peace. Not because life is perfect, but because it is not dependent on anything outside of itself. This is what Buddhist wisdom points toward. Not the removal of life's challenges, but the realization that your peace does not have to depend on them. Because when you stop running, you stop feeding the idea that something is missing. And without that idea, the tension fades, the urgency softens, and what remains is a quiet sense of enough. Enoughness in this breath, in this moment, in simply being here. It doesn't mean you stop living your life. It doesn't mean you stop moving forward. It simply means you are no longer running from yourself. And that changes everything. Because now, your actions come from a different place. Not from lack, not from fear, but from presence. And presence has a very different quality. It's calm. It's steady. It doesn't rush. And in that calmness, you begin to trust life more, not because you know what will happen, but because you're no longer resisting what is. And maybe this is what you've been searching for all along. Not an answer, not an outcome, but a place within yourself where you can finally stop. And maybe, in a quiet moment like this, when you're no longer reaching so far ahead, you begin to feel that gentle stillness, not empty, but quietly full. And perhaps tonight, you don't need to go anywhere else. Just remain here for a little while longer and notice what it feels like to no longer be running. 12b. What is meant for you will not require force. And in the end, after all the chasing, all the holding on, all the trying to control what was never yours to control, a quieter truth begins to settle in, not as an idea, but as a feeling, a deep, steady understanding that what is truly meant for you will not require force. After everything you've just experienced, the exhaustion, the awareness, the softening, the moments of letting go, you begin to notice something different about the way life moves. It's no longer something you have to push, something you have to fight for, convince, or hold together with effort alone. Because the things that are truly aligned with you don't feel like a constant struggle. They don't require you to lose yourself just to keep them. They don't leave you questioning your worth or wondering if you're enough. They meet you in a different way. It almost feels like standing in a current instead of swimming against it. There's still movement, still direction, but no resistance, no constant effort to stay afloat, just a natural flow that carries you forward. And maybe this is what you've been sensing all along, without fully realizing it, that the more you forced certain things, the more they resisted, the more you tried to make them work, the more unnatural they felt. But when something was right, there was a quiet ease, not perfection, not certainty, but a sense of rightness, like you didn't have to question it constantly, like you didn't have to convince yourself to stay. Have you ever experienced that? A moment, a connection, a path, where things didn't feel forced, where you weren't overthinking every step or analyzing every detail, where you could simply be without adjusting who you are. And that's alignment. And alignment doesn't shout, it doesn't chase, it doesn't demand, it simply feels right. In Buddhist understanding, this is not something you create, it's something you recognize when you stop resisting, because so much of your suffering was never about what you didn't have. It was about holding on to what wasn't meant to stay, trying to force something into a place it didn't belong. And in doing so, you created tension, You created struggle. You created the feeling that life was something you had to fight. But what if life was never meant to be forced? What if it was meant to be met with awareness, with openness, with a willingness to let things come and let things go? It almost feels like you've been trying to hold water in your hands, tightening your grip, hoping to keep it from slipping away. But the tighter you hold, the less remains. And the moment you relax, the moment you allow, it settles, it stays, and without effort. That's the paradox. What is truly yours doesn't need to be held so tightly because it doesn't depend on your constant control. It stays because it belongs, and what doesn't belong, no matter how much you try, will always feel like something you have to manage, something you have to maintain, with effort, with worry, with fear of losing it. But when you begin to trust this, even just a little, your relationship with life changes. You stop chasing everything. You become more selective, not out of fear, but out of clarity. You begin to notice what flows and what forces, what feels natural and what feels like constant effort. And slowly, you allow yourself to step away from what requires too much force, not because you're giving up, but because you're choosing alignment, because you're no longer trying to prove that you can make anything work. You're allowing yourself to be with what already does. And maybe this brings you back to where we started, that quiet exhaustion, that feeling of trying so hard and still feeling like something was off. Now you can see why. It was never about effort. It was about direction, about holding on to what was never meant to stay. And the moment you begin to release that, life feels different, not easier in every way, but lighter, more honest, more aligned with who you truly are. And maybe this is the truth that was waiting for you all along, not hidden, just covered by everything you were trying to force. What is truly yours will find you in stillness, not in struggle, not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped chasing what was never meant for you. And maybe, in a quiet moment like this, when your mind is no longer reaching, no longer trying to hold everything together, you begin to feel that gentle sense of trust, that things don't have to be forced to fall into place. And perhaps tonight, you don't need to search anymore. Just rest and allow what belongs to you to arrive in its own time. Core message of the video. Maybe, after everything we've gently explored together, you're beginning to notice something within yourself. That quiet exhaustion you've been carrying was never just about doing too much. It was about holding on to things that were never meant to stay. For so long, it may have felt like life was asking you to try harder, to fix more, to chase further, just to finally feel at peace. But now, something softer begins to emerge, a different understanding that maybe peace was never waiting for you at the end of the chase. It was waiting the moment you were willing to stop. Not everything you held on to was yours to carry. Not every door needed to open. Not every connection needed to stay. Not every path was meant to become your journey. And slowly, as this realization settles in, you begin to feel lighter, not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer resisting what is. There's a quiet image you might return to, a still night, where everything around you has softened. No noise, no urgency, no need to prove anything. Just a gentle sense of presence. And in that stillness, you realize something simple, but deeply freeing. Nothing is missing in this moment. Nothing needs to be forced for you to be okay. And maybe tonight, as your thoughts begin to slow, you don't need to search for answers anymore. You don't need to replay the past. You don't need to reach for what hasn't arrived. You can simply rest. Because the truth is, peace was never found in chasing. It was always here, hidden beneath the effort, waiting in the quiet space. You're only now allowing yourself to feel. And perhaps this is the beginning of something new. Not a new goal, not a new version of yourself, but a new way of being. A one where you no longer hold so tightly. One where you trust that what is meant for you will come without force, and what is not can gently fall away. If these reflections found their way to you tonight, you can take a quiet moment to notice what stayed with you. And if you feel called to continue this journey, you're always welcome here with Buddha's Teachings Audio, a space where you can return whenever you need to slow down and reconnect. Thank you for staying with these words, for allowing yourself to pause, and most of all, for giving yourself this moment to finally let go and rest.